Everyone laughed. That's how it always started, with laughter. The room, golden and glittering, roared like a beast fed just enough sarcasm to keep it tame. Ricky stood dead center, grinning that half-sinister, half-brilliant grin, the one that made you unsure whether to chuckle or clench. He was back. Again. Hosting the Golden Globes. And this time, no one expected what came next. At first, it was classic Ricky. Shots at studio execs, barbed jabs about streaming wars, a scathing one-liner about nepotism babies so brutal someone audibly choked on their champagne. But then he turned, casually, slowly, toward a corner of the room where a producer sat stiffly under the low lights. And he said her name. Not in praise. Not in jest. But in accusation. "You know, it's funny," he said, smirking like he was about to tell the dirtiest joke in Britain, how everyone in this room knew what she was doing. And yet, here she is. Nominated. Again. There was laughter, but only for a second. Then a vacuum of silence. A pulse of discomfort. Her face, Andrea Holloway, head of one of the biggest independent studios in LA, didn't twitch. But the eyes around her burned holes through the tension. He kept going. "Look, I'm just saying, if I did what she did, I'd be in a cell. Or worse, back doing panel shows in Brighton." The monologue ended 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours. And by morning, it was everywhere. Ricky Gervais calls out Hollywood producer on live TV. Brilliant or brutal? The joke that shook the industry. Too far this time? But the real story didn't start until 2 days later. Someone posted a clip that hadn't aired, one shot on a phone, behind the scenes. It showed Ricky backstage, immediately after leaving the stage. He looked shaken, not smug. Like someone who just crossed a line they hadn't planned to. "Did I just screw myself?" he asked the producer. No laugh. No punchline. Just that one question. The internet went wild. Some praised him as the only one brave enough to say what everyone had whispered for years. Others crucified him. Not because he lied, but because he exposed something they weren't ready to confront. But Andrea? She didn't say a word. Not for a week. Not even when sponsors pulled out. Not even when a former assistant released a statement accusing her of manipulation, of trading roles for favors, of running her studio like a personal empire of fear dressed up as feminism. Then she posted. 4 words. "Truth is not courage." That was it. The next day, Ricky was dropped from his tour by 2 venues. Netflix postponed indefinitely the special he had in post-production. Friends unfollowed him publicly. Agents stopped picking up his calls. And the worst part? He didn't fight back. There were no savage tweets, no comeback jokes on stage. Nothing. Because for the first time, Ricky Gervais, the man who had laughed in the face of cancel culture, who had gleefully disemboweled sacred cows on live television, looked like someone who had finally said something he wasn't sure he should have. Or maybe he was sure. And that's what scared him most. The truth is, no one tells you what happens after you burn the bridge and stand there, smoke in your hair, watching the crowd decide whether you're a hero or a pyromaniac. No one prepares you for the silence. The worst of it wasn't the headlines, or the hate mail, or the press waiting outside his London flat. It was the look in his sister's eyes when she called. "You knew what it would cost," she said. And he had. But he also knew what it would cost to say nothing. What no one knew, yet, was that Andrea Holloway had offered him something the year before. A role. A show. An obscene amount of money and creative control. All she wanted in return was his silence about something he saw. Something she knew he'd seen. He turned her down. She smiled. "Be careful, Ricky. You don't want to be remembered for the wrong thing." He wasn't sure anymore what that meant. But he was about to find out. He sat in his kitchen with a lukewarm cup of tea and an unread copy of the Times folded neatly beside him. The headlines had moved on. Now it was an actor's divorce, a surprise album drop, someone's accidental nip slip on a red carpet. But Ricky knew better. The news cycle moved like a drunk toddler, loud, unpredictable, and always leaving a mess behind. And somewhere beneath it all, his name still lingered like the smell of burnt toast. He hadn't stepped out of the house in days. People thought he was hiding. They were wrong. He was waiting. It started with a letter. A real one. No email. No envelope. Just a single sheet of white paper, slipped under his door in the early hours of the morning. 5 words, typed in a serif font too classy to be random. "You're not the only one." No signature. No return address. But something about it made the hairs on his neck stand. Then came the emails from burner accounts with names like TrueHurts99 and Holloway Files. Some were junk, fake leads, bitter fans pretending to have dirt. But one stood out. It had an attachment, a single video file. Ricky clicked. It was grainy, Surveillance footage from what looked like a private party, some rooftop downtown LA. There were maybe 30 people, men in tuxedos, women in dresses that cost more than most people's yearly rent. The camera angle was bad, but you could see her. Andrea. And then him. A boy. 16, maybe. Young. Uncomfortable. Standing beside her, wine glass in hand, clearly unsure if he should be there at all. She leaned down and whispered something into his ear. He nodded and followed her. The video cut off. Ricky stared at the black screen long after it ended. He wanted to believe it was fake. A smear campaign. Something defaked and malicious. But he recognized the background, the rooftop bar at the Leviticus Club, exclusive, members only, no phones allowed. He'd been there once. Hated it. Too much cocaine and not enough decency. And that boy? He looked familiar. No name, but something in the face, something heartbreaking. He called Rachel. She didn't pick up. He tried again. Nothing. He tried an old contact at the Daily Mirror. Blocked. He tried his brother. Voicemail. It was happening. The slow unspooling. The pullback of polite smiles. He wasn't just being canceled. He was being erased. That night, someone broke into his house. They didn't steal anything, but they left something. A flash drive taped to his bathroom mirror. When he plugged it into his laptop, there were dozens of files, emails, receipts, hotel bookings, NDAs. Names he recognized. Names he didn't. But one name stood out. Thomas Griggs. He was 17 when he overdosed in a luxury hotel in Bel Air. It had been called a suicide. The press barely mentioned him. He'd been an intern for one of Andrea's subsidiaries. And here was the paper trail, text between him and an assistant, begging to be reassigned, emails citing inappropriate contact, a final voice memo sent at 3:14 a.m. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want out. Please. Please. Ricky sat back in his chair, numb. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't another roast. This wasn't punching up at millionaire actors with fragile egos and PR shields. This was rot. Deep. Institutional. The kind that doesn't just protect itself, it retaliates. He knew if he went public with it, they'd crush him. But if he didn't, then what the hell was he even doing? He opened his notes app, the same one where he'd written jokes, outlines, punchlines. He started a draft, but not a monologue this time. A manifesto. The next day, Ricky posted a video. No edits. No music. No clever framing. Just him. Tired. Unshaven. Honest. I've been part of this industry long enough to know where the bodies are metaphorically buried. Turns out, some are literal. You want truth? Here it is. He uploaded the documents. Every file. Every photo. Every name. He waited. The first response was disbelief. Then fury. Then silence. For hours, nothing happened. And then finally, a single tweet from a journalist at The Guardian. Just got off the phone with someone whose brother was Thomas Griggs' roommate. There's more. Much more. Hashtag Holloway Files. The dam had cracked. And Ricky? He sat in his chair, watching the storm roll in, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to peace. Because sometimes, the only way to tell a joke is to let it kill. They came quietly. Not with handcuffs or flashbulbs or sirens. No, that would have given Ricky too much drama, too much power. They came with a letter, slid across his kitchen table like a contract with the devil, and a politely worded request to cease dissemination of confidential material pending review. He read it twice. Then he laughed. Not the usual Ricky Gervais laugh, the dry, barking kind that mocked everything including itself, but something quieter. Sadder. Like a man who'd been screaming for too long and finally realized no one was listening. You boys brought lawyers, he said, pouring himself a drink. You should have brought a conscience. They didn't answer. But they didn't need to. Because outside his flat, a war had already begun. Hashtag Holloway Files was trending in 37 countries. Names were flooding social media, some real, some wrongly accused, some anonymous voices suddenly brave enough to tell the truth they'd choked down for years. But here's the part no one tells you about when you expose powerful people. They don't panic. They prepare. Andrea Holloway's PR machine moved with military precision. Within hours, she had denied all claims, called the documents deep fakes and fabrications, filed a defamation suit, and released a 3-minute video of herself walking solemnly through an orphanage in Guatemala. Public opinion split like bone. Half believed her. Half were outraged. And somewhere in the middle, someone lit a match. That someone was Ava Chin. No one had heard from Ava in years. A former child star turned producer, she disappeared from the public eye after a quiet breakdown and an even quieter lawsuit against a studio no one could name. People whispered about it, but she never spoke until now. She posted a video. Not glamorous. Not staged. Just her. Tears in her eyes. Ricky Gervais isn't lying, she said. And I know because I was that 16-year-old. Not the one in the footage. Another one. Another rooftop. Another whisper in my ear. Her voice cracked. And she ruined me. Andrea ruined me. But Ricky? He remembered. The video hit 1 million views in an hour. By the end of the day, 7 more women had come forward. One of them? Andrea's former assistant. The one who had written the NDAs. Filed the invoices. Booked the hotels. She had everything. Emails. Audio. Video. A vault of rot. Open one file at a time. And the more that leaked, the quieter the studios became. Suddenly, Ricky wasn't alone. He wasn't even the story anymore. He watched it unfold from his couch, eyes red, phone buzzing like a dying fire alarm. His agent called. Apologized. Begged him to come back. Netflix called too. So did HBO. So did the BBC, in that stiff, guilt-laced tone of someone realizing they'd banished a prophet to keep their tea parties comfortable. But Ricky didn't answer. Because something had changed. Not just out there, in Hollywood, but in him. He wasn't trying to be funny anymore. He was trying to be right. And that's far more dangerous. The morning of the Academy Awards, Andrea Holloway withdrew from public life. Her company issued a statement full of buzzwords: healing, accountability, misunderstandings. But the damage was done. 57 lawsuits. 3 studio board members resigned. A major streaming service went dark for 24 hours after employees staged a walkout. And Ricky? He stood in the wings of a theater in downtown London, about to perform to a sold-out crowd for the first time since it all began. No script. No cue cards. No apology. Just a stool, a spotlight, and the microphone he always called his only real friend. The crowd roared when he stepped on stage. He waited, then leaned in. You ever say something you thought was a joke, and it turns out it was the most honest thing you've ever said? A pause. And you ever realize that maybe it wasn't funny at all? No laughter yet. Just stillness. And for the first time in his career, Ricky didn't mind. Because sometimes, the silence means they're finally listening. He stared at the crowd and didn't speak. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. In showbiz, that's suicide. Silence is where doubt breeds, where hecklers live, where the room turns. But this wasn't showbiz anymore. Not for Ricky. This was confessional. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat. You know when you're a kid, and you see something you're not supposed to? He said. Maybe your dad hits your mom. Maybe your uncle watches you just a bit too long in the changing room. And no one says anything. You grow up thinking, maybe that's just how the world works. A pause. You become an adult, and you carry it in your bones. That quietness. That ache. The crowd didn't laugh. They didn't fidget either. It was like they were holding breath for someone else's trauma. Ricky looked up toward the balcony. His eyes scanned over the sea of people, but his thoughts were somewhere else entirely, his own childhood. He remembered watching his brother get slapped across the face by their father for crying during ED. Don't be a fucking pansy, Simon, his dad growled, like weakness was an infection. That moment stayed with him. Not because of the slap, but because no one said anything afterward. Not his mom. Not him. Not even Simon. That's what Hollywood reminded him of. A room full of silence. Decorated, perfumed, dressed in gowns, but silence all the same. He stepped off stage 45 minutes later to a standing ovation. Not for jokes, but for truth. For once, he wasn't a performer. He was a mirror. And people were finally ready to look. As he walked backstage, someone was waiting for him. A woman, mid-40s, in jeans and a navy coat that still had rain on the shoulders. She wasn't a fan. Not really. She introduced herself quietly. My name's Eleanor Griggs. The name hit like a gut punch. Thomas Griggs' mother. The boy from the footage. Ricky blinked hard. He wanted to say he was sorry. He wanted to say he remembered the boy's face. But none of those things felt like enough. So he didn't say anything at all. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. A school portrait. Smiling. Alive. He loved your stand-up, she said. Said you told the truth when no one else would. Ricky looked down at the photo. Thomas was wearing a green tie, his teeth a little crooked, one ear sticking out more than the other. He looked like any kid. Ordinary. Forgotten. Until now. I want people to know who he was, she said. Not just how he died. Ricky nodded, his throat dry. I'll tell them, he said. I'll tell them everything. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in front of his laptop, the photo beside him, staring into the cold blue light of the screen. His fingers hovered over the keys. And then he started to write. Not jokes. A story. Thomas's story. The internships. The long nights. The late texts from producers twice his age. The fear. The silence. The overdose that wasn't a mistake, it was an escape. He included everything he'd learned. The studio's cover-ups. The hush money. The NDAs disguised as opportunity. He called it the unseen boy. He posted it on his personal blog at 4:12 a.m. No press release. No promotion. And then he waited. By 8 a.m., it had 300,000 views. By noon, 2 million. By sundown, Thomas Griggs was the name on everyone's lips. Not because he died, but because he'd lived. But not everyone was reading. Inside a Beverly Hills townhouse, Andrea Holloway stood barefoot in a minimalist kitchen, staring at the news on her phone. Her assistant hovered behind her, unsure whether to ask if she still wanted to keep her lunch with the Amazon exec. Andrea put the phone down. Calm. Cool. Dead in the eyes. They're going to crucify me, she said. The assistant said nothing. Andrea smiled. Then we crucify him first. Because in Hollywood, truth is currency. But control is everything. And she still had plenty left. To destroy someone in Hollywood, you don't have to prove they lied. You just have to plant the seed of doubt. Cast a shadow. Twist a fact. Take something real and bend it just enough. Then package it. Headline, clickbait, collective gasp. That's exactly what she did. Early Tuesday morning, Variety dropped an exclusive. Anonymous sources claimed Ricky Gervais had allegedly traded silence for access to private events and may have attended the very parties he's now exposing. The piece didn't outright accuse, but it didn't have to. It left just enough rope. By lunchtime, TMZ published an old photo. Ricky, looking heavier, scruffy, standing near a pool in 2013 at a villa that had since become infamous. He was holding a drink, laughing next to someone later accused of abuse. The headline was sharp and cold. The truth teller, or the bystander? Ricky saw the photo while brewing his tea. He'd missed 3 calls from his lawyer. And even though his chest tightened, his face didn't change. He remembered that night. He had been there. He left 45 minutes later because something felt off. Not illegal. Not even scandalous. Just wrong. And that's what haunted him now. Because not seeing something doesn't absolve you, especially when you could have. The next blow came from someone he never saw coming. Kev Larkin. Stand-up comic. Old mate. They started out together in the 90s, dingy pubs, sticky floors, 5-pound sets. Kev never got big, but he was sharp. Respected. People listened when he spoke. And now he tweeted this. Known Ricky 25 years. His morals always kinda depended on whether it suited him. Not saying he's lying. Just don't make him a martyr. Hundreds of thousands of likes. Thousands of comments. What are you implying? You know something? Say more. Ricky messaged him. Really, Kev? You spoke at my brother's funeral. You called me the most honest guy in the room. What changed? No reply. Kev had picked his side. That's when the real takedown began. Old videos. Old bits. Clips from stand-up specials. Jokes already dissected years ago, now yanked out of context. Held up like evidence in a trial he never agreed to attend. This wasn't a scandal. It was a setup. And Ricky knew it. So he did the one thing he'd always done best. He spoke directly. He went live on YouTube. No fanfare. No script. Just him, in an old sweatshirt, eyes baggy, voice cracked. Okay, he said. You want the whole truth? Fine. Here it is. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted. Yeah, I was at that party. I didn't know what was happening behind those doors. But I was there. And maybe I should have seen it. Maybe I should have asked more questions. But I didn't. I just got uncomfortable and left. I thought that was enough. Turns out, it wasn't. He paused. And yeah, I've said dumb shit. Jokes that age like milk. Some of them were bad even back then. If you're looking for a saint, it's not me. I'm not here to inspire anyone. I'm just tired of being afraid. His voice wavered. His hands shook. You can cancel me. You're already doing it. But I know why I started this. Not for clout. For a kid who isn't here anymore. For his mom, who handed me his photo. For everyone speaking up now because I spoke first. I didn't do this for fame. I did it because if I didn't, something inside me would have died. He ended the stream and sat there, breathing, not waiting for applause. Just silence. Because silence, for once, felt honest. 5 hours later, a letter arrived. Legal documents, crisp, official, packed with threats and consequences. But the final page was handwritten. It was from Avichin. I saw your video. That wasn't a performance. It was a confession. After my interview, others came forward. Women, men, staff. There's a list now. People ready to talk. And you were the reason. Don't stop. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about Andrea anymore. This wasn't about one predator or one studio or one scandal. It was about the whole damn system. The machine that teaches you to stay quiet when you should be screaming. The fear of being destroyed for telling the truth. And Ricky? He wasn't done yet. It started small. A line buried deep in a podcast. Some culture writer in Brooklyn, talking about the Gervais effect. Casual, almost bored. But it spread. People latched on. Not because it was catchy, because it felt true. The Gervais effect. One man says something no one else dares to, and suddenly everyone starts clearing their throat. And then came the list. It was anonymous at first. Just a spreadsheet. Names of people in the industry. Victims. Survivors. Timestamped accounts. Links to articles no one had paid attention to. Evidence. Whispers that had lived in the shadows for years now screaming in bold font on Twitter. Most heartbreaking of all? How many people already knew? Former assistants. Stagehands. Interns. Hairstylists. Casting directors. They'd seen it, felt it, suffered through it, but told themselves it wasn't their place. Just a bad night. Just the business. Now they were talking. And Andrea Holloway? She was unraveling. Not publicly yet. She still smiled in every press release, still hosted her dinner parties with foreign journalists and stocked her fridge with imported sparkling water. But behind the gates of her hilltop estate, panic had settled in like mold. Because for every voice going public, she didn't know what they were holding. Then someone leaked an email. From Andrea. To a studio executive. Subject line, the Gervais problem. In it, she wrote. His popularity makes him dangerous. We need to move first. Feed the press. Seed the doubt. Don't get your hands dirty. Just give them the blood and let them smell it. It was cold. Calculated. Proof. The media tried to downplay it. Claimed it was out of context. Said it was standard crisis strategy. But the public? They weren't buying it anymore. Not this time. Meanwhile, Ricky was in Manchester, hiding out in a friend's attic flat with 2 dogs, a printer that didn't work, and more anxiety than he'd ever admit to out loud. He was off socials, off-grid, exhausted. He hadn't slept in 3 nights. Not because he was scared. Because his brain wouldn't stop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Thomas Griggs. Not dead. Not on the floor of that hotel suite. But alive. Laughing. Wearing the crooked school tie. Looking up at him like he expected Ricky to do something. To protect him. To be the person everyone assumed he already was. The weight of it, of being believed, of being watched, of being the one who finally didn't flinch, was heavier than fame had ever been. Then his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. But when he listened to the message, he dropped the phone. It was Simon. His brother. He hadn't heard from him in over 10 years. Not since their falling out. Not since Ricky said something cruel about how Simon chose to be small. Simon had hung up and never called back. But now, his voice was older. Slower. But sure. You're doing the right thing, Rick. Even if it ruins you. You were always the funny one. The loud one. The one who never shut up. I hated it. I hated how people listened to you. But now I get it. You're saying the things I should have said. Don't stop. Don't stop. Ricky sat down and cried. The kind of crying that comes when you've been holding your breath for months. Years, maybe. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't want statues or think pieces or docuseries. He just didn't want another Thomas. 3 days later, Avichin reached out again. This time, not with a letter. With an offer. I'm producing a documentary, she said over the phone. Real victims. Real names. Real change. You in? Ricky hesitated. I don't want to be the face of this. You already are, she said. But this time, you get to shape the story. They met in person. It was awkward at first. Ava had a quiet intensity. A soft way of speaking that made you listen closer. She didn't flinch. Didn't sugarcoat. She'd seen too much. But when she smiled, Ricky realized something. This wasn't about guilt anymore. This was about building something. Truth with roots. By the end of the week, the two of them had formed a team. Small. Tight. No studio backing. No corporate strings. They started interviewing people behind closed doors, anonymously at first. They collected footage. Stories. Testimony. Every tape was a wound. Every voice was a scar. But they kept going. Because no one else would. And when they were ready, when they had everything, they planned a release date. February 18th. Thomas Griggs' birthday. Hollywood braced. Andrea's lawyers sent cease and desist letters before a single second of footage aired. But it didn't matter. Because the industry had already changed. You could feel it. In the emails that stopped being returned. In the panic of boardrooms. In the trembling hands of those who'd always been untouchable. The machine was still spinning, but it was shaking. And Ricky? He wasn't finished. Not yet. The night before the premiere, it rained in Los Angeles. Not the polite kind of California drizzle that barely dampens your windshield. This was a downpour. Sheets of water hammered the city like the sky had finally had enough. Maybe it had. Maybe it was washing something off. The documentary, The Unseen, was set to premiere at a small theater in Silver Lake. No red carpet. No PR blitz. Just a screen, some folding chairs, and a guest list made up almost entirely of the people who had been ignored for too long. Ricky stood outside under a narrow awning, smoking a cigarette he'd promised his doctor he'd given up. He looked tired. Not Hollywood tired, but human tired. His hands were jammed in his coat pockets. His collar was soaked. And for the first time in a long time, no one was asking for a selfie. He liked it that way. Inside, Ava was doing final checks, sound, projection, lighting. She was all business, but he could see it in her eyes. Tonight mattered. Not because it was a film, because it was proof. And proof doesn't get silenced. At 8:01 p.m., the lights dimmed. At 8:04, the opening frame rolled. A close-up of a photo, Thomas Griggs, smiling, school uniform, his name in white text at the bottom. The room was silent. Then the voices began. One by one. Raw. Brutal. Real. They weren't actors. They weren't influencers. They were survivors. Gripping their own truth like a shield they had waited years to lift. And in the middle of the second act, when a soft-spoken woman described Andrea Holloway's grooming dinners in excruciating detail, you could hear someone in the back let out a sob. No one turned to look. Because everyone understood. After it ended, the audience sat in stunned quiet. Then applause. Not the kind you give to a great film. The kind you give to a funeral. Ricky didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just sat there, hands clasped, as if holding something that might fall apart if he let go. But the story wasn't over. Because that night, at 2:16 a.m., his phone buzzed. A blocked number. A voice, tired, almost broken. It was Andrea. I watched it, she said. No greeting. No defiance. Just those 3 words. He didn't speak. She continued. You want me to say sorry? To who? To all of them? Silence. Do you even know how many of you there are? She asked. Men like you who looked away, laughed it off, shrugged. Don't pretend you're different. Still, he said nothing. Because she wasn't wrong. And that was the worst part. I'll disappear, she said finally. Not because of your film, but because I'm tired too. Then she hung up. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes fell faster. Executives fired. A major agency dissolved. Lawsuits filed in droves. Studios scrambled to clean house, not out of morality, but PR necessity. But the ripple had become a wave. And you can't PR your way out of a tsunami. As for Ricky, he turned down interviews. Refused book deals. When one network offered him a 7-figure special titled The Truth Teller, he laughed. I already told it, he said. And you lot didn't listen the first time. He went quiet. Not out of shame. Out of choice. 6 months later, he was walking his dog in Hampstead Heath when a teenager ran up to him, awkward, skinny, nervous. Hey, sorry, are you? Ricky raised a brow. The boy fumbled. I just wanted to say, thanks. For what you did. My sister, she went through. Anyway, thanks. Ricky blinked, then nodded once. Tell her she did the hard part. The kid grinned. You ever gonna do stand-up again? Ricky thought about it. The lights. The crowds. The laughter that always came with a twist of guilt now. Maybe, he said. When it's funny again. The world didn't change overnight. But it changed. And sometimes, that's enough. Not to fix everything. But to start. Because the first man who yells, fire, in a burning building doesn't do it to be a hero. He does it because if he doesn't, everyone burns. And Ricky? He just couldn't stay quiet anymore. The end.